and stuff like that. And I just got to set up a couple of computers over here to make sure I can see the comments and stuff, right? So just hang tight. All right, good to see comments are working. This is my first time in the live stream, so please bear with me. Hello, Evelyn. Thanks for tuning in. A bit of a slow start, you know. Happy New Year to everybody, and yeah, thanks again for joining in. So I'll probably go over this again or just mention this again, but for the people that have signed on just now, I've made a little agenda to stay organized. I apologize, my other computer where I'm trying to switch to like have stuff pop up on screen is not cooperating, so I'm going old school with paper. But this is sort of the agenda. We're going to be doing an intro and talk about our little contest giveaway. We're just talk about 3D printers and how they work. Hey, Steve3 and Walt, thanks for joining in. The setting up your printer, where to get 3D models from, and preparing your models, some slicer and printer settings, if I can get this stupid computer working over here. Yeah, slicer and printer settings, gluing and finishing your prints before you actually put them together to make whatever it is you need to make, and painting, and then a little bit of Q&A at the end. So I'd love it if people could, if you had specific questions, because it's kind of hard for me to pop around to like all the different printers and this table over here, where I might be demonstrating some stuff. It's a little bit hard to kind of pop around and see comments at the same time, and I gotta have like reading glasses on. I've gotten a little older. I need reading glasses now for detailed stuff. So please bear with me if I can't get to your question or answer your question right away. And hi, Will. Nice to see you. This is really cool. I've never done a live stream before. Thought I'd wear my official shirt, you know, look professional, right? Have a bit of protocol, right? I like my protocol. Again, we're just going to give people a few minutes and maybe allow myself to talk about myself. I made notes just in case. So my name's Terry. If you haven't met me before, hello. Nice to meet you. Hi there, Tiny Bismarck. All the cool kids do wear glasses, don't they? They do. Awesome. So yeah, my name's Terry, and I'm in Vancouver. Hey, Andrew. And I've been making props and costumes kind of all my life. I was that sort of kid that would always make crazy things, you know, at home and make my own Halloween costumes. And then my background eventually professionally became graphic design. And then I worked in game development for about 19 years. It was a very long time. And my wife and I had a daughter. And it was sort of during that time I sort of explored the idea of like, hey, could I take this hobby a little bit further and do more with it? And that kind of just blew up and kind of went crazy. So yeah, I think probably I've been making sort of props and costumes for collectors, you know, cosplayers, and a bit of film and TV work, probably for about 7 years now. And I also do I did character design when I was in gaming, so that was really handy, you know, bringing that into the current kind of realm, and then doing some concept artwork, and then I've done soft costumes and hard costumes. So armor kind of is my, hi Deo, armor and helmets and that sort of thing, and props for, you know, all sorts of different shows and movies is kind of my thing, so kind of my jam. So what I thought would be really helpful is giving an introduction to 3D printing. So I know if you're a seasoned veteran, you know, you might want to go grab a coffee or something, because probably for the first 5-10 minutes, I'm just going to talk about how printers work, because I'm going to assume that you know nothing, right? Like maybe you got a printer for Christmas and you're like, I'm super excited, I can't wait to print my Mandalorian helmet, I have no idea what to do, it's sitting in a box. Now, I'm not going to go into uber detail of, you know, every nut and bolt that goes together, because there's tons of videos out there that cover that sort of information. What I want to do is just make you more comfortable with this new big toy that you got. But it's a cool toy, but it's also an incredibly useful tool, okay? The way that I use 3D printing is maybe a little bit different than how other people use it. Some people will 3D print everything on a costume or a prop, like helmet, armor, every single piece. And that's totally cool if you want to go that way. Oftentimes I'm 3D printing stuff so that I can, you know, get it all nice and smooth and finish it. And then I'll make like a silicone mold so that I can cast parts. And that might be for different reasons. Maybe I need to make a whole bunch of these things, and it's faster to mold them and cast them to make a bunch of reproductions than it is to continually 3D print them. I might need to make it out of a different material. So maybe it needs to be made out of urethane so that it can be flexible and soft, or maybe it needs to be transparent or something like that. So there's all sorts of reasons as to why you might not just want to use the print by itself. But I would say probably the vast majority of people, they want to print some costume thing, right? There's a Mandalorian, you know, bracer gauntlet there, right? So they want to print this and then go cosplay with it, go to a convention or join one of the clubs. So what this will hopefully help you do is just get you a little bit more familiar with all the parts of around 3D printing, and just, you know, not make it such a scary subject, right? So I'm trying to keep an eye on the time. I'm already 7 minutes in, and I forgot to share this on my on my other Facebook page. So just give me a second, bear with me here. I'll make it happen. Thanks for your patience. Thanks everybody that's just joined in. I was just mentioning that it's my first live stream, and I'm having some issues with a computer over there that I can't get the slicer to work on it. I don't know why, but I will try to do my best. So just bear with me while I share that the live feed's happening, or stream. Do people say live feed anymore? It's really streaming, right? Live stream on 3D printing now. I hope everybody had a good and safe holiday. I know it's been a little bit crazy, but I hope this subject matter is kind of cool too, because it's like 3D printing is such a fun thing. You can make all sorts of costume things, but you can just make all sorts of knickknacks. In fact, I was originally going to be using my iPhone as the main camera, and then I had some memory issues with my phone, so I'm actually doing this on an iPad. And I had to figure out yesterday, like, how do I mount the iPad to a tripod? I know, I'll model up a bracket that has like a gimbal on it. And now so there you go. Like in, 3 hours, I was able to get something to work pretty quickly. So, yeah, anyways, here we go. So let's get started. Again, I just want to show this for new people joining in. We got a little bit of an agenda just to try to stay on topic, so I can stay on topic. Introduce myself, which I already did. We're going to talk about 3D printers and how they work, setting up your printer, where to get 3D models, preparing your models, slicer and printer settings, gluing and finishing your stuff, and then painting, and then a bit of Q&A at the end. And I will try to, if you have a specific question about something I'm talking about, feel free to ask it. If you have something that's kind of more in-depth, let's save that to the end, because it's very easy for me to go off script, off tangent. All right, so okay, let's get started. So 3D printers and how they might work. So what is 3D printing? So 3D printing is basically, sorry, let me move this around over here. You can see I've got a bunch of 3D printers over here. Let me just move this guy out of the way. So I've got I got 4 3D printers on this particular bench. Oh, wait, sorry, before I forget, I'm going to be giving away a 3D printer. That's pretty cool. Probably a bunch of you probably stayed or wanted to make sure that you came for that. So I don't know if you can see it way back there, but that resin printer over there is an Elegoo Mars Pro. Now that's my personal printer, but Stephen, my awesome friend from resinprinters.ca, and he's the official Elegoo repair service provider in Canada for Elegoo. So if you're looking to get different types of resin printers, supplies, or parts, they're super awesome, and they are going to be giving away one of those Elegoo Mars Pro resin printers. So if you live in Canada or the United States, we're going to be picking a winner at some point during this live stream, and Stephen is kindly going to be shipping it to you, whether you live in Canada or the United States. If you're international, you will need to pay for shipping for that printer. So good luck. May the odds be ever in your favor. There's a special phrase here that you may want to remember. I'll be bringing this up several times. Yeah, it'll be really easy for you to enter, so just keep that in mind. I'll just show that to you again, the spelling, in case you didn't get it. So let's talk about 3D printers. Again, there's a whole bunch of different printers over here. Sorry, let me just angle this down a little bit, okay? Give me a second. There we go. And pardon my mess. Yeah, so let's talk about different types of printers. So in general, when people talk about 3D printing, it's kind of like two different types of 3D printers. You're either dealing with an FDM printer. So FDM stands for Fused Deposition Method. And basically what that means is it's hot filament being, pressed down onto the plate, and it's building up one layer at a time. I'm going to show my little demonstration as to what exactly that means. The other type of printer is, like I mentioned or showed over here, again, sorry about the mess, is that guy, and that's a resin printer. So how a resin printer works is, it basically, I'm going to try to angle this down so I can show my little demonstration. A resin printer works differently than an FDM printer. I'm going to describe what an FDM printer is because most of the time people are dealing with this type of printer. So, allow me to demonstrate. I apologize. I did not have time to build this model to scale or paint it. Did you like that reference? I thought it was a cool reference. So this is a typical 3D printer. This is an Ender 3 Pro, and they're fairly inexpensive, okay? When we're talking about consumer grade printers, this is kind of what most people are buying nowadays, right? So I've got a Prusa i3 over here. I've got an Ender 3 Pro. There's a Prusa Mini over here, and then there's a CR10 SV2 over there. Most of these operate in pretty much the same way. And the reason why I want to show this little demonstration is because a lot of people get kind of flustered by all the different sort of names and terminology. It can get really confusing, and I totally understand and appreciate that. But I thought I would do a demonstration of how a 3D printer works. And basically, if you have a hot glue gun, you already know how a 3D printer works. Okay, and I've used this analogy with a few friends, and they're like, yeah, it kind of makes sense. So this is how a 3D printer works. So imagine if I wanted to make a log cabin using only a hot glue gun, what would you do? You'd probably go and start squeezing the hot glue gun, and you would lay a square of glue down, right? You'd be running it around like this. And that's essentially one layer, right? So if you think about the parts on a 3D printer, they're really not that different than what's on a hot glue gun, okay? You've got this part of the hot glue gun, which is hot, okay? So on a 3D printer, you've got this part underneath here that's called the hot end. It's the hot end of the 3D printer. If you are pushing glue along or on your hot glue gun, you obviously pull this little thing and it feeds this glue into the hot end and it melts it, right? So this glue is really no different than the filament, right? These giant spools that are all over the place of filament that are being fed into your extruder. So you pulling the trigger on your hot glue gun is the extruder. Now the extruder, it's just a fancy word, but you're extruding material. So this is a motor on the 3D printer, and the motor turns slowly with a bunch of gears that go together, okay? So it might be a bearing on one side and a gear on the other, and it's going like this, and then it's feeding the filament between the gear and the bearing. It's pushing it down, and it's pushing it down into the hot end. The hot end is melting it, and then there you go. There's your start of your log cabin, right? So if you were going to continue to build a log cabin, you would just continue to go around and around and around, and then eventually you would have a log cabin, right? That is essentially how a 3D printer works. Now, some important parts to that. If you were just building a log cabin on your countertop, it's going to stick just fine because you're dealing with hot glue. It's not going to work with filament, and most of the times you need some form of adhesion on the bed. So most 3D printers nowadays have a heated bed. So this printing surface is actually heated underneath. So usually it's about 55 or 60 degrees or so, and that allows the melted filament to bond to the surface, especially for those first few critical layers. But generally it stays heated the whole time. And then as the print completes, when everything's done, it will cool itself off. It'll cool off the hot end, and it'll cool off the bed, and most of the times your print will actually just pop off by itself. But I hope that analogy kind of gives you an idea of how a basic 3D printer works. Now, if you were just using glue and going around, you probably have to wait a long time because that glue is staying hot all along each path, right? And so what it is there's two different fans on most 3D printers. There's one fan on the Ender 3, or most Creality printers, it's in the front, and that's called the hot end cooling fan. So what that's doing is there's a sensor inside called the thermistor, which is registering the temperature of the hot end, and then the fan basically regulates that temperature to keep it at a specific temperature. So most 3D printers, if you're printing PLA material, which is most common material, it prints at about 195, 200 degrees, and you'll keep it at that temperature. So that's what essentially the computer and the fan and the thermistor is doing. It's calculating and going, okay, I want to make sure that this stays at 200 degrees so that glue doesn't get too blobby or doesn't get too hard. You don't get cold. That's what that front fan is for. The second fan that you see on the side is called a part cooling fan. So as you're printing your part, if you imagine me doing this with a hot glue gun, and you've probably done this when you've used hot glues, you'll actually blow on it to try to cool the glue as quickly as possible. Maybe you need to bond two pieces together and pick it up. Well, that's kind of what that fan's doing is it's cooling the part so that the filament plastic can harden and maintain its shape. So by the time the next layer comes around, it's solid, right? The other reason why I like this log cabin analogy, metaphor, whatever, thing, is it also relates to 3D printing. So again, if you're looking at this little diagram here, if I wanted to make this stronger, I could make the walls of the log cabin 3 logs thick or deep, right? So those are essentially the walls of the cabin. When you're doing a 3D print, you can tell the printer basically say, this is how many times I want you to go around when you're making the walls of my log cabin, right? I want you to go, if you do it one time around, that's kind of called like vase mode, and that would end up in a very sort of brittle print. If you did it like 3 or 4 times around, it'd be pretty solid. So, thanks, Walt, for the question about bed leveling. I will answer that in just a bit. I'm going to get to that. But 3 to 4 layers is generally kind of what I use. I use a minimum of 3 layers for any kind of prop. If it's something a little more structural, I'll go 4 or 5 layers. You will get more strength out of a print with wall thickness than you will with infill. So let's talk about that for a second. If this was a solid log cabin, not just walls, but just a solid cube, it might get weak. You might be able to squish it. Your print would be 100% solid plastic. Most of the time you don't want to do that because that'll use up a lot of filament. It'll take up a lot of energy. It'll take a long time to print. So most times prints are, sort of semi-hollow, but they'll have like a lattice structure inside, and you can decide how you want your infill to be. So all that said, that was really boring. Sorry it took so long. That's kind of how an FDM printer works. I just want to talk about resin printing really, really quick. A resin printer has a vat. It's like a little tub with a clear plastic bottom, and there's a build plate on top. So instead of printing and having your print rise up like this, what's happening is the printer will push the build plate down into a liquid resin, a UV-based resin, and then based on the model that you've created, it will expose, using the bottom of the screen, an LED screen that's on the bottom of the printer. It'll expose a layer, a very thin layer of light, and it'll basically cure that thin layer of resin. And then the printer will pull it up a bit off that plastic and then put it back down and expose another layer. So if you think of like a CAT scan, like a skull, how it would be sliced in layers, that's how a resin printer works. Now the benefit or differences between an FDM printer and a resin printer is amazing for detail, okay? I'm just gonna reach over here and grab, this is like a little Grogu on a Harry Potter broom, you know. And so a lot of people will buy resin printers because they want to print like small figures or detailed statues and that sort of thing. Now, it does work great for certain prop things, but the fact is most common resin printers are fairly small, right? I mean, the even that Elegoo Mars Pro back there, let me just tilt this back up. It's like, you know, this big, a bread box size. Now you can get bigger resin printers, but they're considerably more expensive. You can get into like an Ender 3 Pro or any of the newer model Ender 3s for like, I think about $325 Canadian. I'm in Canada, by the way. Yay, Canada. In the US, they're like $180. So I mean, the cost of 3D printing has gone down significantly. My first 3D printer, which is that blue framed monstrosity over there, which I still haven't gotten working yet, it cost about $3,000, and it hasn't been working yet. I got it to print something once, but when you think about, and that was whatever, 4 or 5 years ago, the accessibility of these printers now is amazing. So if you're thinking about jumping in the hobby, you know, find a friend that's got a 3D printer, ask if you can play around with it, but also don't be afraid to just dive right in, because it's a really cool hobby. So I will move on. I apologize for that delay. Oh, so yeah, let me talk about how the rest of this printer works, actually. So when we talked about the hot glue gun analogy, if you're building a log cabin, you're going to have to move this around in a square. So when we talk about 3D models and axi, basically this is the hot end. It sits on a carriage, like on wheels on this rail, and it needs to move in this direction, okay? And that's called the X, right? So in 3D modeling, that's X, usually left and right. The Y is where the bed needs to move back and forth. Oops, sorry, I'll show you on this guy because it's not on right now, but this bed goes back and forth. So that will give you this direction, forward and back. And then of course you have Z, which most printers have threaded rods in the back with motors. And as they turn the threaded rods, it'll move this entire gantry up and down. So that will give you the Z. So now that you can move in 3 directions, if you think about that log cabin, you can go this way, right, which is in Y. You can go X here, and then as you build it up, that's in Z. So that's how you get your 3 directions. One more thing I want to talk about that a lot of people ask about and they don't really understand how it works is supports or support material. So I'm just going to use this Yoda head, this Grogu head as an example. So if you're printing that log cabin again, and it's a big cube, one area that you can't just print by itself is the roof if it overhangs the edge of the cabin itself. You can't print any of the stuff on this side because there's nothing underneath it. You can't print in midair. You can't hot glue gun something in midair either, right? It's just going to come dribbling all out. So you need support material. So support material, I'll demonstrate with this guy here. What support material is it basically prints like a grid-like structure at the same time that it's printing the rest of your model. And that's basically you telling it to say, I need support material underneath this. So it's kind of like when you're building a skyscraper or something. You want like a lattice or a framework around it to keep everything in place as you're building it, right? Well, in this example, you wouldn't print this Baby Yoda head in one piece or one shot and have nothing underneath here because the ears would never print. So you could do that one of 2 ways. You could print support material underneath the ears to support it, or you have to be smart about how the model is either cut up or how you print your model. So this is really kind of it's not so much tricky, but it's kind of the art behind 3D printing. Is a lot of people see this and they're like, wow, it looks amazing, it looks great. I have no idea how to do that. Yeah, because a lot of it is just trying to figure out what's the best way to orientate something on the bed. So again, if this was printed like this on the bed, I'd have to have all this support material underneath the ears so that the ears could print properly. And most of the time, the underside of the ears would be very rough. Because if you imagine that hot glue gun, it's basically trying to print hot glue on top of a grid structure to fill in those gaps. And oftentimes it's very hard to do that. So you would have to patch that up with Bondo or seam it together. But another clever way to print something is to cut up your model. So I believe for this particular model, I actually, in 3D, I would cut the ears off. And then that way there was a flat surface, and then I printed the ears sideways. So they were like that on the bed. So that way the ears needed no support at all. And then the head, I actually was able to print it like flat. You can see the flat surface right there. I printed that flat on the bed, just straight up like this, with no supports, and it was totally fine. And it even printed these overhangs, or not really overhangs, these sort of archways in the eyes. So a 3D printer can actually, if you have like a dome surface or a curved surface, an archway like this, it will actually be able to print without needing supports underneath here, because it's actually going to be printing like this, right? Zit, 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 zit. It'll move over here, do this one, it'll do this one, come back over here. It'll keep doing it until basically both sides kind of get close enough, and then they'll meet. And it's only at the very, very tip there where you may get a little bit of like stringing or something like that on the print, but most of the time you're not even going to notice it, or it could be easily sanded out. So that's just a really easy way to kind of think about how 3D printing works and how to orientate your prints to make it work a little bit better. So let's talk about setting up your printer. Actually, before that, I'm going to show this agenda again. I apologize for the people that missed out the break in the live feed there. We are moving on to setting up your printer. That's kind of the next step. I'm trying to stay organized. And if you haven't already, try to memorize or write down this word, because you will get a chance later to win a resin printer from resinprinters.ca. Cam has a question. The z-axis only goes up during the print and never goes up and down. That's true. So the z-axis, sorry, I didn't get see the rest of that comment, but as the printer is printing, it will only rise up. So it's basically trying to print everything on the bed at that time. It never goes up or back down, okay? It's always constantly going up. So if you're printing a big helmet or something, by the time you're done, this gantry will be like way up here at the top, and then the helmet will just be sitting there. And then it'll move the bed forward for you to take your print off. It never goes up and down. It always just prints up. So let's talk about setting up your printer. I'm just going to move this tripod, pardon me, a little closer to this guy. Give me a second. Stay on target. Stay on target. I'm going to tilt this down. There we go. Okay. Let's just talk about this printer. So this, again, was an Ender 3, a Creality Ender 3 Pro. And they're fairly easy to put together. I mean, if you opened up the box, you could probably get it together in about an hour and a half. Like, they're fairly well put together. A lot of the parts are already put together. Most printers come in parts. You can order, higher end printers like a Prusa or an Ultimaker. You can actually have it where it just comes and it's like ready to go. Obviously, that's more expensive. I actually think it's a good idea to put together a kit, because then you will know what needs to be fixed if something goes wrong. And most of the times, I think people sort of discount. They think a printer is really complicated, and in a sense it is. But when I talk about the hot glue gun analogy, you already know all the parts. You know how to extrude hot glue. Your brain is the computer. You're feeding in the glue sticks. You've got that basic principle. The rest of it is hardware. And I will say most of the time that I've helped friends build their 3D printer, or I've helped them fix it, it's something that they didn't put together properly. So it's like literally as simple as like they didn't line something up properly when they bolted it together. There are bolts that are loose. One thing I'll mention right away is when you obviously read the instructions, follow the instructions. All the instructions for these printers are really well done nowadays. Make sure everything's tight, even parts that are pre-assembled, because you got to remember these things are being cranked out of a factory as quickly as they can, with screwdrivers or Allen keys, whatever. They're not going to take extreme care to make sure that everything is lined up properly. So just even if there's a part that looks already assembled, I actually always like loosen it and kind of retighten it just to make sure that it's being put together properly. Once you've actually assembled your printer, and again, I'm not going to go into super deep detail with this because there's a bajillion videos online of how to put together your printer. There are some basic sort of maintenance things that you need to do. Sorry, I'm going to put this head back on, otherwise I know it's going to go flying across the room. Cleaning the bed, making sure the bed's clean. So what I usually do is I use isopropyl alcohol. You can get like 50, 70, and 99%. And I usually just get like a big jug. I mean, nowadays we're all super familiar with rubbing alcohol, right? But yeah, Andrew mentions, make sure you go check out Facebook pages of whatever company's printer that you bought. There's usually support groups, tons of people that will help you out. By cleaning your bed, so often people will just start printing right away, and they're like literally eating a slice of pizza or something, and I'll be like, "Is the bed clean?" And they're like, "Oh, the prints keep popping off," and just even the grease from your hand, the oils from your hands, can inhibit the filament from being printed, on the bed surface. So just make sure that you clean the bed. So what I do is I will buy big jugs of IPA, isopropyl alcohol, and I'll put it in a spray bottle, and then that way I can spray it on the bed, and then I just use a paper towel and wipe it off, and it's all good. As I was mentioning before, most 3D printers have fairly decent build surfaces. The Ender 3, or Ender 3 sort of series, or CR10 series, a lot of them will come with this really flexible sort of plasticky material. So it's meant to be stuck onto a magnetic surface, and then it magnetizes to the bed. Then your print goes on it, and then the idea being that you can just because it's magnetized and this is flexible, you can peel it off, and then you can pop your prints off. Now, they work okay. My issue with these is a lot of times beginners, and I'm going to talk about bed leveling in a second, is when they don't level the bed properly, if they get the nozzle too low and it starts gouging into the bed, it can actually force the filament a little bit too deep into this surface. It can actually make it adhere too well. I've seen people try to pull prints off this and basically tear big chunks out of this surface. So it's not my favorite surface. Any printer that I've gotten so far, I've usually gotten spring steel plates. So you can get these online. And what it is it's a sheet of spring steel, and because it's steel, it can magnetize to the heated surface. The heat transmits all the way through, and then the surface is covered with PEI, which I don't remember what PEI stands for. Maybe somebody can look that up for me. But basically, the filament sticks like crazy to that surface, and then when you're done, you can just bend it, you can flex it, and then your print will pop off. On my slightly older Prusa over here, this is actually a PEI surface, but it's not removable. So I have to use a spatula, like a paint spatula or scraper, to basically pry the print off. On this Mini over here, this is a removable spring surface. And over here on the Creality, same thing. I haven't stuck it down yet, but that's a flexible surface as well too. So some of the other bigger printers, if you're getting like a Creality, a CR series printer, they'll come with a glass bed, okay? Some of them come with either a borosilicate glass bed, some of them come with these textured beds. So glass is and still is a fairly common material that manufacturers will use. The issue being is adhesion. So, back in the day, and on that big giant printer back there, it would just be a plain piece of glass, and you would have to use masking tape, and you would put glue stick on it or hairspray. It's just a huge pain in the butt. So I would say whatever printer you're getting, if you can get a removable magnetic spring steel sheet, do that. They're not that expensive. They're maybe like $25 or $20 for the smaller size and maybe like 30 something for the bigger size. I have had other printers with glass beds, and then what I do is you can, the thing is you want your print to stick on that very, very first critical layer, because basically it's the foundation of your log cabin. If that foundation's not down hard, it could fail, your print could pop off, it could start moving around, you're just going to end up with spaghetti, and that's never a fun experience. So I usually kind of babysit a print. When I start a print, I'll actually make sure that I won't stay for the whole first layer, but I'll make sure that the first like 15 seconds of it is good before I'll walk away. But on printers like this, with the PI surface, spring steel, on my Prusa, I will literally hit print and walk away and not even look at it and come back like 10 hours later and have 100% confidence that it's going to stay pretty good. In terms of adhesion, if you do need some extra adhesion, you can use hairspray. Back in the day, people used to mix like, shaved ABS plastic with like acetone and like make a slurry and spread it over. Or again, you would use hairspray, like Aquanet hairspray is supposed to be pretty good. Or Yoo-Hoo glue stick as well too. I've kind of just moved beyond that stuff. I don't really sort of see the need for that. When I did have a glass bed, I did use this product called Magigoo, and it was really great. It came in like it's kind of like a roll-on, underarm roll-on stick, like a sponge thing, and you just spread it on cold, and then by the time the bed heats up and you start printing on it, it's like solidly glued on. And then another cool aspect is when it cools off, it pops off by itself. So if you're stuck with a glass bed, this is a product that I would recommend, Magigoo. It's worked well for me, but I've upgraded most of the printers to not use glass anymore. Yeah, so let's move on. Leveling, okay? So there was a question earlier about having issues with leveling the bed. Now I'm not gonna do it with this particular printer because it's already leveled. And a lot of people say like they have a lot of problems, and there's really just some simple tricks to it. Okay, so what does that mean? Leveling the bed. Leveling the bed means that when this print head comes down and it homes itself, and I can even just I cut the filament earlier, but I'll just home it for you. So when you hit home, basically tells the printer to go home. And usually home is this corner right here. And that's basically its kind of starting point. So when you level a bed, you want to make sure that that nozzle is about a paper thickness away from your bed surface on all spots of the bed. Now the bed is mounted to the printer, on these printers anyways, with 4 bolts. The plate moves back and forth. The Y carriage moves back and forth on this axis via this belt. So the motors pull this belt back and forth, and then your build plate surface or your bed is mounted to that, and it's usually mounted with 4 bolts, one in each corner. And there's these big wheels underneath that you can turn. So as you turn them one way, it raises that part of the bed, and if you turn it the other way, it'll lower that part of the bed. And I even have this stupid little sticker that I put here. Turn the knob clockwise to raise the bed. I still have to remind myself. But like I have not re-leveled this printer in like a year and a half. And I've probably like printed like 80 different things on it, like at least. The issue that most people have is, again, that whole assembly thing from the factory. It's not going to come leveled from the factory. You need to level it yourself. You should also level your bed hot. Okay, you should actually heat it up first, because the heat can change the whatever physical qualities of the metals and stuff, expansion, that kind of thing, and it can mess things up. The trick, or the way that I normally level, is with the printer. I'll do it with the printer off, and then I'll adjust it while the bed is heated, if that makes sense. So with the printer off, I will manually just move the X carriage and the bed so that it's centered first, and at least just get the nozzle like a paper thickness under the nozzle. Okay, and then I will move the hot end to the front corner, and then I'll level it using the knobs, and then I'll do this corner and I'll level the knobs. And basically, I kind of just go back and forth between the different corners so that I can, you know, adjust it so that the bed is as flat as it can be. Now, nowadays, most of the materials that they use, they're a little bit better quality. Back in the day, like on the first Creality machines, the beds were like, they might be a little bit warped, okay? And that was just the quality of the aluminum or metals that they used. And people cheat, they'll put like a couple pieces of tin foil or something underneath the glass. Totally works, it's still totally fine. What's important is that that nozzle is the same distance above the bed, again, a paper thickness on all of the corners. So I would go check out YouTube. There's tons of videos on how to level a bed, but the number one problem with failed prints is poor adhesion and not leveling the bed. So usually when someone has a problem, I'm like, did you level the bed? And they're like, oh, I think I did. I'm like, spend a little more time, try to get right, and it'll work out better for you. Just a quick point on supports over here. So, and supports and raft, okay? I'll talk about that raft or brim. And again, I apologize. I was going to show a bunch of stuff on the slicer on that stupid laptop, but it's not happening. When you place your model on the bed, there's a couple ways to do it. If your model has a substantial enough surface on the bottom to secure itself to a bed, you don't really need any extra quote-unquote support or skirt. Sorry, Cam's asking a question. Springs, solid spacers, or silicone spacers? So what Cam's referring to is between the Y carriage and the bed, there are springs here between the Y carriage and the bed, and the bolt kind of threads through it, okay? So what's happening is the spring is pushing up against the bed to keep the tension tight. I know there's people that will swear by like solid, you know, bed mounts and springs and that sort of thing. There's two things I'll talk about. I've actually never upgraded any of the springs on these. And what I do is basically play with the distance of there. What happens is there's an end stop here, okay? So there's usually a switch. If you're not dealing with any fancy bed leveling sensors, all that kind of stuff, on these sort of what I call dumber printers, is basically there's end stops. So there's little switches where basically when a particular part of the printer gets to the end of where it needs to go, it'll contact a switch and then it'll stop, right? Oftentimes, the placement of that switch, which is bolted in by the factory, it sometimes isn't at the right height. So some people need to they're adjusting their bed and they're raising it way up and the bolts start to get really loose. And they're like, I have to relevel my bed all the time because the wheels start to come loose because the springs, it's kind of gone beyond where the spring can provide tension. So that's kind of where upgraded springs come in. Sometimes they're a little bit longer, or sometimes they're stiffer. And that will provide more stiffness for the bed. And so I've never actually upgraded any of the springs. I just spent the time kind of adjusting the end stop switch and adjusting the bed. And again, I know people seem to have problems with bed leveling, but like I had a CR10S, which Caleb, my friend Caleb, has now, and I probably leveled it like 4 times over the life that I had it, which is not very many. I know there's people that are like, oh, they gotta level their bed like every single print. You shouldn't have to do that. If you're doing that, there's probably something wrong. So consider upgraded springs if you need to. Just back to your surface thing. Sometimes if you're printing something like a blaster or something like really tall, again, part of the art of 3D printing is figuring out how you want to orientate your model on the bed. If you're printing something like this, a lot of times people are like, I have no idea what to do. I'll just go like that, you know? Well, then the top side will usually print really well, and then the bottom side is going to look kind of awful because we talked about supports and stuff like that. One way to do it would be to split a model down the middle so you're printing a left and right side, and then you glue it together afterwards, right? This kind of model is obviously not going to have any adhesion problems on the bed because it's such a big surface. I printed this particular one by it was a solid model, and I sliced it actually right around here, and then I placed that I placed it like that on the bed, and then it printed it like this. And I wanted it that way because I would get the best resolution in the print along the length of the barrel. If you print something this way, and you're trying to print that kind of surface, you're going to get those layers. You're going to see we talked about the sort of CAT scan layers, right? Or like, you know, those old maps in like elementary school, you'd feel it, and it'd be like a relief map. It was textured. That's kind of what it would feel like on a round surface like that if your layers were kind of normal height layers. So oftentimes it's about figuring out how to best figure out how to cut up your model, or finding a good model that's already cut up. So some people make really nice models where they're already cut up into pieces that are printable on this size of a printer. And an Ender-3 is a fairly standard printer. Andrew brings up a good point. There's people that make beautiful models, and oftentimes they come from modeling or sculpting like statues or figures, where they're like, there it is, there's Baby Yoda, he's all there, go ahead, print them. But it doesn't work because you're gonna have a hard time printing it in one piece. So even on this guy over here, he looks great. If I hold him up close, you don't see like any print lines on him. But if you look underneath, he's actually separate pieces, right? So I mean, you're not going to see any of this because he's got his robe on. But like look at how, I don't know if you can see this there, but look at how rough that hip is, right? Right? So that's kind of like a very rough, quick print, but you're never going to see that. So I focused all of my attention on the head and making sure that would be smooth. So this particular model was cut up in a way so that the arms could move and the legs could move. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about finding good models. Just getting back to this guy, I find that there's enough surface on this to provide good adhesion on the bed. You shouldn't need anything else. But there's two things I want to talk about when you're in your slicing software. You can add something called I always get brim and skirt mixed up. I want to say brim. So brim is where usually the printer prints a sort of a wider or a fatter layer on the bottom to give your print more purchase or more grip on the bed. And you can decide on how thick, I'll hold it this way. You can decide on how thick you want that to be. Now that's only going to be one layer thick, but it's enough to give adhesion to that model. So you can see here, there's just like a tiny little, there's like a tiny little bit of it left over from some of I think I had some support material on the side there. But it's just a very thin layer, and you can literally peel it off with your fingers. Sometimes you might need to add that to a model before you print it. In terms of support material, let me back up, a raft. A raft is where someone might want to decide to print like an entire surface on the bed of the printer before they print the model itself. Now, I actually don't like to print rafts. Do you alternate between the question was, do I alter between the different... I basically decide depending on the shape of the model. I pretty much will never use rafts. One, I think it's cheating. Two, it uses a lot of material. It wastes a lot of time. The purpose of it, I can usually do it with a brim. So if the model will print faster, use less material, do it more quickly with a brim, then why use a raft? A lot of times people use a raft because they have adhesion problems. So really, they got to go back, rewind this video about 10 or 15 minutes and talk about the adhesion. If they had the adhesion working properly, they wouldn't need a raft. So I find a raft is fairly excessive. A raft, again, will print an entire layer or multiple layers of material before it will print any support structures or the model itself. And it's just a lot of material to use. I find that if you kind of know what you're doing and you make the right decisions, you're not going to need a raft. I don't think I've ever used a raft except for on resin models, which had fairly intricate supports. I don't think I've ever needed to use a raft on an FDM printer. I'll just talk quickly about support material. So you can decide on the pattern that the printer will use to create your support material. For this particular model, it sort of did like the zigzag pattern, right? It kind of wound its way up. So as it's printing these semicircle shapes for the front of this mask, it's printing this zigzag pattern at the same time. And no one cares that it's all wavy and stuff. What matters is that it provided a bit of a platform for this extra bit that was hanging over the top. Now, again, you can adjust settings for how you want your support material to be created. I pretty much use Prusa Slicer, so I know a lot of people are going to talk about slicing programs. The most common one, especially for Creality machines, is Cura, C-U-R-A, Cura. So that's the software that you need to slice or prepare your model before you can actually send it to the printer. Again, I would totally demonstrate on that stupid laptop, but it's not working. So normally you would take your software, you load in your model, and you say, okay, I want it to be sitting this way on the bed, and I want to decide how many layers, how many wall thicknesses, what the wall thickness is going to be, what the infill is going to be, how fast, what the resolution of the print is going to be. So most printers come with a 0.4 millimeter nozzle, and it'll print at, I usually print at like 0.2 layer height for most models. And then you would save that G code, you would export that G code onto your SD card, and then you would stick it in your printer, and then you would tell the printer to print. And I'll just walk you through some of that. But when you do, those settings that you decide on for your support material will basically dictate how easy it is for your support material to be removed. Now, you can play around with Cura a lot, and I'm sure it's gotten better, but I used Cura for about 2.5 years, and I was already using Prusa Slicer for my Prusa printer, and I thought I would try using it for all my other printers, and it's just like a billion times better, in my opinion, because they take care of most of the extra steps for you, okay? So when you buy an Ender 3, if you download Prusa Slicer for free, there are already profiles in there for Creality printers, and most of them work great right out of the box. This was printed on this Ender 3, and it's, like I said, a 0.4 nozzle, 0.2 layer height with support material, and I just want to show you like how easy it is for this to come off. Like that's it. And there's a bunch of like little, there's usually one layer that's like a little more attached, but it's like it comes off so easily. Oh, there it is, right there. Okay, and the bottom is like pretty clean. I don't know if you can see that there. It's pretty clean. So yeah, I don't use Cura anymore. I found that there was just way too many sliders and knobs to adjust. People have come up with good profiles for it, but I find with Prusa Slicer, it's just so much easier to use. So I say if you're going to get a printer, Ender 3 Pro kind of, or Ender 3 V2, that sort of thing, play with Prusa Slicer, and like you're off to the races. I'm just going to go back to my schedule thing. Where are we? Preparing models. Oh, we talked about printer and slicer settings. Gluing and finishing prints. I want to mention this again, anybody that joined late. Thank you to Stephen from resinprinters.ca. Remember that phrase, because I'm going to ask you about it later for your chance to win a Elegoo Mars Pro resin printer. Okay. Oh, let's talk filaments. Okay. So I've probably used or gone through about 15 different brands of filament. And I'm just going to talk about PLA. Okay, so the types of filament that you can get for a 3D printer. Again, this is the glue stick that basically gets fed into the printer and starts your print. And I'm going to demonstrate that just a bit, just so you guys can see this. Most people are going to use PLA. So PLA is a sort of a cornstarch derived material that once melted turns into hard plastic. And you can get all different kind of brands. You can go to 3D print suppliers. You can find stuff on Amazon. I stuck with all the major brands when I kind of first started. So I got some Prusa filament way back. It's a really, really nice filament, but it's incredibly expensive, in my opinion, especially shipping from Europe, which was kind of the big, the con for using that. But I've used it, and it's really, really nice. Hatchbox is a really common brand. There's Amazon Basics, AMZ 3D. There's all different types. Now, a roll of filament can range usually around $25 to $30-ish. I am in Canada, and just about in every country, there's kind of like a couple of big filament manufacturers or suppliers. And I've been going to filaments.ca for years now. Filaments.ca, if you ever want to sponsor me, like I literally buy boxes of 10 rolls at a time because I go through it rather quickly. So they have a fairly affordable filament called Econofill. And I think it's like $19 a roll or something like that. But it's not bad. I used that for a long time. I switched to this one called EcoTough, which is basically like a PLA plus type of material. The reason why I like it, and this is something to look for, is I find some, it's over there, but there's a roll of, I don't remember what that is. I can't see the label right now. But some filaments are really slick and slippery, and they're hard. So they tend to snap, and they're brittle. Like, check out this roll. I just left it on there, and I didn't do anything with it. It just snapped in the middle of it, and and you can say it's from like drying out and all that kind of stuff, but I've never had that happen with this EcoTough. That filament, most filaments tend to be really, really smooth. Again, really, really firm. I'm living in a colder environment. I'm on the west coast of Canada. Cold right now, not cold all the time. But this EcoTough, it's textured. And I find it's a little more flexible. Okay, it's not going to break when you're trying to straighten it out and you're trying to feed it in there. It just works well for me. The other benefit of it is I find it sands easier. So if you're making props and costume stuff, it tends to sand a bit easier than other filaments. And I just like it. It's worked for me. It hasn't ever failed. So it's just worked really well. So try out some different brands. Just talk about different types of filament for a second. You can get, PETG and ABS and nylon and, Ninja Flex, like super flexible materials for other types of things that you might want to print. The fact of it is most people are going to stick with PLA, right? It's fairly easy to print. You can print it at 195 degrees to 200 degrees. It's quote unquote non-toxic. It's cornstarch-based material. Now I would go and read all the safety forms and notices and all that kind of stuff. The fact of it is anytime that you're melting any kind of plastic, you are creating some sort of fumes or particles. So in this room, this is kind of like my 3D printer room. I do have like an air scrubber thing with a HEPA filter on it. If I'm printing lots of stuff, I will have that on. If it's just like some small little thing and it's not taking very long, I don't usually turn it on. But it's just something to be aware of. If you're using a resin printer, the smell might really bother you. You might want to vent that thing outside a window, like make a duct thing and vent it out. Resin fumes, and we'll talk about resin for a little bit when we do the finishing part. It can get toxic, so just be careful with the material that you're using. But yeah, Materio 3D is another one. Materio 3D. And Prusa and Filaments.ca are some of the ones I use. So they're, as my friend Shannon says, they're the Ferrari of filaments. Not really. They're just a little more expensive, but I think you can understand why now in terms of the quality. And I think sometimes a lot of the failures in prints that people get are oftentimes due to poor quality filament or leaving out in the cold, or using really old stuff. And I tend to find some of the cheaper ones tend to just not perform so well. So I'm just going to show you real quick how to start a print. So sorry, I'm trying to get this thing aligned, but this printer's been warmed up for a while. Sorry, I don't have a full roll of filament attached to the top of this right now. But just in terms of the menu, this is Ender 3 Pro. I've had this for like a year and a half or 2 years or something, and over 2 years actually. And they're really like rudimentary. It doesn't have a fancy touch screen or anything, but like they're super easy to use. You push down on this dial to get access to a menu, and then you turn the dial to pick your selections. So most of the time what I do is I go to, when I've got something that's ready to go, I'll go to prepare and I'll scroll down. There's all these other functions, but you scroll down to Preheat Pla and you hit the prepare button. And so what it does is it basically heats up the hot end of the printer. Sorry, I'm going to rotate this. It heats up the hot end of the printer and it heats up the bed. So it's preparing both elements basically to get up to temperature. Once it's up to temperature, you can print your item. I mean, it's literally as simple as that. Most of the stock settings should be fine. So you go print from TF. TF is another term for SD card. And then it'll show you all the models that you may have loaded onto your printer. So, for example, I'm just going to go to this 3D buckle that I created. So you just rotate the knob until you highlight it, you push down, and it basically it might need to adjust the bed or the nozzle to the temperature that I set in the slicer. So the onboard settings for the printer may be slightly different from the settings in the slicer. You can get both of them to be the same if you want to, but I've never bothered because it's, well, I'm lazy, and it's not that hard to wait like 2 minutes. Oh, there it goes. So the nozzle's starting to move. It's going to do what's called a purge line first. So again, just like we talked about the hot glue gun, that's the extruder in the back. That's the extruder motor. There's the filament. It's going to wait till everything warms up, and it's going to do what's called a purge line. So it's going to squeeze out this bit of filament just on this outer edge to kind of like clean out any gunk from the nozzle and make sure that everything is still functioning properly. So, can't quite, oh my goodness, it's skipping. It's probably been sitting a long time. There it goes. You can see the purge line over there now. Okay. And so now you can see it's going to start doing the whole log cabin thing, right? So it's going to do the perimeter of, I think for this particular print, I did a skirt. So what it's doing is it's doing a line around all of the models first, basically again to kind of clean out any gunky filament that might be there. And then here it goes. It's starting to print its first, sorry, a little off screen there. It's starting to print its first item. So usually what it'll do is it'll go around and print the outer perimeter of that particular model first before it does the infill. And you can usually tell the slicer if you want it to do that or not. And then it'll go around and basically do all the different models. So this was like a bunch of little clips, little plastic clips that I designed for the Squid Game masks. So I'm not going to print the whole thing, obviously. I don't want it making a ton of noise, but you can see the filament's already gone almost all the way down. It used to be like that long, and it's already used most of it already. So I generally, a lot of people ask too, like, what do you do if you, oh, and if you want to stop it, just go to the menu, and you can either pause the print. So you can pause the print, you can pause it to change the filament, or you can stop it entirely. So if I just hit that, it'll stop it, and it'll automatically start to cool down the printer. So you never have to worry about leaving a printer, well, let me rephrase that. You shouldn't really ever leave a printer unattended. Like, you really shouldn't be like, hey, I'm gonna hit print and then go on my ski vacation or something like that. That's kind of a bad idea. What a lot of people will do, because you never know what's gonna happen. It might overheat, you might have a wire break, etc. What some people will do is they will get little room cameras, what the hell are these called? Like nanny cam things, whatever. You can do that. You can get like super fancy, Octoprint. You can get like Raspberry Pi things and set up like little cameras for you to monitor your prints. So like you could hit print and go to work some other place and like remotely monitor your print, watch it on a camera. You could even, if you've got Octoprint or some other system set up on your printer, you could actually control it remotely. There are people who will like download models on their phones, send the model to their printer and print it, and they're not even in the room, right? So if you really wanted to go that way, you can do that. I've never really needed to do that. So yeah, but that's basically as simple as it can be in terms of like how you can get started with printing something. Where do you get models from? So the easiest place to get 3D models is if you go to Thingiverse, right? So Universe, Thingiverse. It's basically like a free site where people will upload and share models. So what's a little bit different from the 3D model printing world to like kind of the prop and costume communities is like 3D printing people will often share stuff because it kind of came from that whole like, hey, I made a bracket for my phone or whatever, I want to share this cool thing. On the prop and costume side, you know, it might be a case where someone spent a long time on a particular model and they may think that it has value. They want to sell it. Maybe they don't want to give it away for free. It's sort of two slightly different trains of thought. They've kind of essentially merged over the last, whatever, few years. And there's lots of sites where you can get free 3D models. You can buy 3D models. You can even go to 3D printing marketplace where you can, you know, say I'm looking for this statue of this character from my favorite video game or something, and you can like hire someone to like make that model for you if it doesn't exist. So there's tons of resources for that. But Cults 3D is another great site. Etsy and Patreon, lots of great models there. So a lot of my Mandalorian things that I've gotten, you know, these are like Darren Pattenden's Great Ape Studio models. And you know, most of the time, you know, I usually don't balk at any sort of pricing that people have. Most of the time models are pretty reasonable. Sometimes people price models like quite expensively, and you know, and I'm not really sure what the rationale is behind. They must think that it has that value, but like most of the times when you see like costume stuff like this or a helmet or whatever, you know, if it's like a full top to bottom, head to toe thing, it might be $100, but you're talking about like a dozen or 15 different pieces. You know, for something like this, it might be like $15 or $20. It's really not that much, and I think it's a great way to continue to support the community if you can. So if you can find a free model, great. I often find that the people that make models for purchase will spend more time and research referencing what that original character or thing looks like, and you're going to get a more accurate model. So I had a question there from if you have to change filament. Okay, so if you have to change filament midway through a print. So as a general rule of thumb, I will never start a big print with very little filament on it, unless I'm here to change it. So that's why I buy like 10 rolls at a time. I always want to have filament on hand. If I ever do need to change filament, most printers have a change filament function, where if you do that on the printer, you can basically, it pauses the print. It'll finish the path, it'll move the head over, and it'll keep it heated. That's the important part, is most updated firmware, most current printers, it'll keep the temperature of the hot end heated and the bed heated. Back in the day, it would turn off the heat for the bed, which is so stupid, and the print might come off. But nowadays when you do that, you can pause it, and then basically you can go through the menu, you can hit the button, and it'll basically retract the filament so you can pull it out, and then you take a new roll and you put it in, and you say load filament, and it'll load it, and it won't do a purge line, but it'll squirt out a whole bunch of filament. You just kind of catch it in your hands, and then just say resume, and then it'll go back. And I've done that plenty of times, and it'll just continue like nothing happened. You won't be able to see where it started and stopped. So that's the benefit of being able to have a more updated printer. Basically, any printer in the last like 3 years or so has a change filament option. I forgot to talk about one thing, something that I don't have on any of these printers except that one over there, which I'm going to take off actually, is what's called a filament run out sensor, is something that's Threave mentioned. So a filament run out sensor sits over here, and basically the filament as it comes down passes through it, and the idea is that if the roll ran out of filament, by the time it slips out of that sensor, it would pause the print or stop the print. Most of the time it would pause it and keep everything heated until you got back to it to reload new filament. I don't use them because I've had them fail a couple times, and so I generally just don't. It's like Terminator, I don't trust the machine. I'd rather put on a fresh roll and make sure that I basically have a good sense now of how much filament something's going to take. But you know, if you've got a big printer, you know, you might need that. If you've got a print that's going to last multiple days, you may need that. There was a question from Walt there about BL Touch and bed leveling sensors. So I didn't go into that because on most of the lower end printers they don't have bed sensors. So what a bed leveling sensor is, or quote unquote auto bed leveling, it's kind of a tricky term. People think auto bed leveling, oh, it must do this thing, you know, by itself. It's not doing that by itself. What it is it's usually a sensor that's near the hot end, and it's detecting how far the hot end is away from the bed. There might be fluctuations or differences in the surface of the bed. You know, you might have a case where you know, the bed is not perfectly leveled. For example, on the Prusa over here, there's no bed leveling. There's no knobs. It's, you put it together, and that's all it is. Because it has a Pinda probe, which is a bed leveling sensor, auto bed leveling right underneath here. So let me just describe that for a second. So if the bed normally should be flat, your print should start flat. If your bed for some reason was crooked, and I'm exaggerating this, right? What that probe is ideally doing is compensating for that difference in the amount of level that there would be. So it's still printing your object, but it's measuring and sensing, oh, it's a little bit further away here. I'm going to compensate for it by extruding more if I have to, right? Or extruding less if it has to. You can get them as an optional item on some printers. You can install them. And then a lot of printers nowadays will come with an auto bed leveling or a bed sensor, or bed level sensor, or BL Touch. I don't have any BL Touches or bed leveling sensors on a couple of these printers. I find if I just set them up right from the get-go, I don't really have a problem. So I just that's all it is. If it's set up from the get-go, yeah, I've never had that problem where stuff comes loose. Most of the time, the stuff coming loose is a bed adhesion problem. I would say that, you know, when we talked a little bit earlier about glass surfaces and that kind of thing, I would say if your surface is better, that kind of eliminates most of the problems for you, as opposed to, but I mean, I would go research that. I just don't, on printers where the bed leveling has come with it, I've kept it on. Printers that I've had where it didn't have it, I've never bothered to go and buy it just because I'm lazy and cheap or thrifty, or maybe a combination of all three of those. So, yeah, there we go. I want to talk about something that Andrew mentioned earlier, not all models being created equal. So, Do3D, DO3D is a company that has made models for a long time. Now they've gotten better, but like I have spent a lot of money on models, and I bought a lot of models from them. And a lot of times, I'm just using them as example. I don't want to scapegoat them, right? But I've probably spent hundreds of dollars US on models purchased from their site back in the day. And a lot of times their models were just not ready for 3D printing. You'd get this big giant, blaster or something. It's not cut into pieces that would fit on a common size printer. And even if it was, it'd be like, oh, look at this giant blaster. Oh, we just cut it like literally into 6 pieces and here you go. And it's like, well, ideally you don't want to glue things end to end if you don't have to. It'd be nice if it was keyed, like there's something with a hole or a slot on this side so that you've got a tab and it could join it. It's more structural, right? And oftentimes their models are just not designed for that kind of thing, which is a real bummer. And you're like, I'm paying a premium price, I should get that. So I would just say that when most places that sell models, or sites that sell models, they will have lots of preview images or even little videos of like how that model is going to go together. I would take a look at that stuff before you actually buy a model. Because again, yeah, for example, I bought like a C3po, wearable thing from Do3D, and it's like, it was bad news bears, man. It wasn't really like a printable thing. And it's a bummer, right? It's a bummer to not have that information up front. Some places aren't that clear with communicating that information to you. So just do your research. I'm just going to plug myself. If you ever have any questions about 3D printing or prop making, feel free to hit me up on Facebook or Instagram. I'll do my best to answer your questions. I'm more than welcome to do that. Okay, I think we're moving on to the next item. I have 2 sheets. I did all this homework, right, for you guys. It's awesome. So good, so good. Gluing and finishing. So let's pretend you've got some prints together now and you're about to put it together. Sorry, just to show you where we are. We're almost at the bottom. Very exciting. Again, resinprinters.ca. Go check it out. Catchphrase. I'm going to move the camera over to this side over here, so you can get a better view of my stuff. give me a second. Let me back this up. And apologies, I had to use an iPad today to for the camera. I'm gonna go like that. I'm just gonna close this door. Just give me a second. Sorry. Sorry about that. My kid just got back and she's probably gonna barge in any second and like ask me to go do something. So I gotta keep it short. All right, let's talk gluing and post-processing stuff and finishing stuff. I'll pull this a little closer. Sorry, just trying to make this work here. How's that? Good. Okay, so let's say you've got your print. What are some great ways? It's too low. Sorry, first time for everything here. All right, I'll try to fit in here. I'll do a squat. Okay. Let's say you've got your print. How do you glue prints together? How do you finish them, getting them ready for whatever it is, a cosplay or a prop that you're working on. Let me just grab a couple things here. Sorry about that. So oftentimes what I'll do first is if there was any support material, I'll remove that and make sure that the model's nice and clean. I will tend to, I usually just try to figure out whether or not it's a good idea to glue a model together, or a part together, or is it better to sand it or do whatever I need to do to smooth it first. So again, for the uninitiated, when you print something, you gotta remember that hot end, the hot glue gun thing, it's going around and around. You're essentially laying like a bead of filament. Cam knows what this is, around. So this is a perfect example. It's just a cylinder that's going around and around and around. And this isn't really so much like ringing. It's, you're just seeing the print lines, okay? So anytime you do something with FDM, there's going to be print lines. And you can set a higher resolution to the model when you slice it. You can use smaller nozzles, smaller layer height. All those things will help improve the print. But of course, it's going to take longer. So most prop and costume things I print at like 0.2. That's just the resolution that seems to work for me. And obviously, you know, I've seen people do it where they're like, hey, look, I'm done. Let's paint it green. Shh, I'm done. That's totally cool. If you want to do that, that's great. If that works for you, it's whatever makes you happy, right? Oftentimes, if you're trying to do, that's not a great example, but you know, you're trying to do armor. You know, this is like a piece of Mandalorian armor, right, for a thigh. You want to try to eliminate as much of the print lines as possible. So, you probably don't recognize me because of this arm. So you have to post-process or finish the print. So there's several ways to do that. So the easiest way, and kind of the most old school way, is sanding, right? And usually what I'll do is, you don't use like wood sanding paper. I go to like an automotive store and get like automotive sandpapers. It's just a better quality. It doesn't crumble as much. Sanding sponges can work really well too, okay? I'm going to talk about this specifically for a second. So the grits that I usually work with are like 180, all right? When I first start out, I'll use like 180, 220, 400, not even really 600. I know a lot of people try to like sand the heck out of their things. Again, oh, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. This is a C3po arm. And I'm building a wearable C3po. So you can see here on the back, there's print lines and stuff. And you can just use your sanding sponge or sandpaper. Actually, this is another pro tip here. The reason why I buy only black filament, okay? Whether I'm using the actual print itself or, you know, printing it and finishing it so that I can mold something, Black will show you the print lines almost immediately. So if I just take this, sorry if that sounds awful. So I don't know if you can see that there, but you can see here, there are areas that are unsanded. That's a bit of a valley. And there's areas here that are completely sanded. So that, like, it shows up instantly when you're using black filament. If you're using white or gray, like a lot of times people will print in the color that the thing is supposed to be. Like, oh, I'm making Iron Man, so you make everything in like red and yellow. It's kind of pointless because you're painting it anyway, so why do that? There's not really, I know people say, well, you know, if it chips, then you'll see the color underneath. No, black. Because if it was a, you know, if it's a thing where it's supposed to look like metal, if it did actually chip and it exposed the black, it's not actually going to be black, it's going to be gray. It's still going to look like metal. No one's really going to notice that it's not metal. So I always use black. But usually what I'll do is I will sand, and I'll go 220, and then, or sorry, 180 and 220, and then 400. That's like the most I'll do. That's for just the print lines themselves, okay? If you need to fill an area, if you need to like fill gaps, like, sorry, I don't have anything that's like freshly printed that has gaps that need to be, well, actually, you know, I lied about that. There's this. So you can see there, these are actually two parts that are glued together, and even though there's a ridge there, there's like a tiny little gap in between, right? So what I do if I need to fill gaps like that, if they're major gaps, if they're bigger than a 1/16 of an inch, I'll use 2-part Bondo. So not this in a tube, it comes in a can. You need to dollop it out, so like a golf ball sized dollop of Bondo with you know, a pea-sized squeeze of the activator. And Bondo is used for car repair, right? So like if you got a big dent, normally you would sand it and then you fill it with Bondo. Before you use Bondo or any of these sort of filling materials, you want to sand your part first. This is a super common mistake where people just start to like apply a filler right on top. This was freshly printed. This is still somewhat smooth, or you just glued it. It's not prepared to take a filler. So if you know anything about like auto body work, like they sand the heck out of the car before they apply Bondo so that you get mechanical adhesion. There's two different kinds of adhesion. There's mechanical adhesion and chemical adhesion. Mechanical adhesion is where like you're sanding grooves into the surface, and then when you apply your material on top, it's going into those grooves and then it's filling it, and that's how it sticks on. The molecular or chemical adhesion is the stickiness of like how, you know, strong it's going to grab onto that surface. So you still need to like sand this before you fill it, okay? So for Bondo, again, save that for bigger gaps. If you're filling like a small gap like this, and again, it's like, I don't know, like a pin, like a needle or a pin thickness, you can use glazing spot putty. So it's Bondo brand that I use, like a 3M, and it's usually red, okay? Bondo is usually gray, the 2-part Bondo is gray, and then this is like red. Now this is, hey kids, safety time. Respirator, gloves, and in fact, I'm actually gonna do that. This stuff smells. So if you are a younger crafter / cosplayer / maker and you're messing around with like Bondo and chemicals and all the stuff that we're about to play with, please wear a respirator, eye protection, and gloves. Super important. So I'm only don't do as I say, not as I do, because I got to talk at the same time, so I can't put my thing on. I'm not going to do the whole thing, but basically you can squeeze this out onto a piece of cardboard and use a popsicle stick or something and spread it into the gap. I actually just like to squeeze I'm just doing a little bit just to show you, right? I usually just like to squeeze a bit on, and with a gloved finger, push it into the gap, okay? And you're like, why did you do that? Why aren't you using like a popsicle stick or whatever? So for 2 reasons. One, this actually smushes it into that valley really well, surprisingly. You're also able to manipulate your fingers a lot more easily than you would a popsicle stick. And you can actually get a lot of mileage out of it. So let's say, for example, you had, I don't know, some sort of, you know, there was, for some reason there was like bigger gaps or something like that. you could actually spread glazing putty, you know, in a big bead and actually like smooth it out like that against the valleys or across the valleys, and it would fill it all in, and it does a remarkably good job. So the advantage of using a filler like this is that it is very, very easy to sand. I'm going to talk about the components of that in just a little bit. So in terms of fillers, yeah, you can use Bondo or glazing putty or marine putty. You've probably seen like epoxy putties where you take like a lump of two things together and you smush it, like Milliput. It's like you can thin it out with water. You can use that over bigger gaps as well too. And there's another method I'm going to talk about in a sec, which is kind of like gluing and filling at the same time. But this is sort of like, I wouldn't say the oldest method, but it's the most common method of how to smooth a print. So you're sanding, you're filling with whatever filler material, and then you would sand this. And you don't want to sand this with too coarse of a sandpaper. Like if I just did that as glazing putty, I would only use 400 grit over that, and it's like ready to paint after that. Like unless I needed to apply more on top afterwards. You should only use this stuff if you need to fill gaps about a 1/16 of an inch wide. Anything bigger, you're going to need to do multiple coats. And the reason why it's only one part instead of a two-part mix is it evaporates in just air. So it evaporates very quickly. So, and with that comes shrinking. So it'll actually shrink into the gap. So be careful trying to like, you know, fill a big valley or something with it. It's not going to work with this. It's going to start shrinking and cracking, and it's going to cause a mess. Use two-part Bondo for that. For smaller stuff, you can use this. Rafts are usually for an uneven load. Yes, that's true too. Yeah, if you have an uneven bed surface in your printing, absolutely you can use Raft. I'm just going to, before I talk about filling, I'm going to talk about gluing parts together. So the most common glue that people use when they glue PLA parts together for a proper costume is like CA glue, which is crazy glue. I use this Bob Smith Industries brand. I've used it for like 15 years or something. And it's really good because they come in different like thicknesses and viscosities. It even comes in a black version, which is really cool for black items. But you might be wondering, well, what's the big deal? Crazy glue is crazy glue. When you've tried this stuff, you'll know. Sometimes you need a thicker viscosity. You need a little bit more working time to be able to apply the glue and then manipulate and move your parts around before they fit together exactly where they want. Like for this, I didn't have the two parts keyed together. They don't fit perfectly. It's just a circle and a circle. So I had to like line it up perfect. But this was perfect for that. It comes in different formulas. So some are more gap filling and some are more runny. And I usually get this purple one, and I use a lot of it. The other advantage with CA glues is you can get an accelerant or accelerator. So this is just the refill bottle. It normally comes in like a little spray. So what you can do is you can align the parts, get it a little bit tacky, and then you can give it a spray, and it'll basically instantly cure the glue. The other reason why I like this particular brand is it tends not to frost as much. I don't know if you played with crazy glues or whatever a lot, but like because of the vapors, if you're dealing with like plastics or clear things, it may even frost or glaze the plastic. This brand, the Bob Smith Industries, doesn't really do it unless you use the accelerant or accelerator. So it works really good. So one thing I will say though, people will use CA glue for parts all the time, and they're like, oh, my costume thing, part of the helmet broke. And I'll be like, did you sand the parts before you glued it? And they'll be like, no, why do I need to do that? Before you use any adhesive, again, just like the sort of auto body prep, sand your parts, okay? If I sanded, I did actually, sand the inside of these two surfaces before I glued them together. So again, that provides mechanical adhesion. So if you think about sanding ridges into those surfaces, and you get glue in between them, and then you can work it together, that bond is going to be so much stronger, right? Because it's got mechanical adhesion and chemical adhesion. The other reason why you want to sand is if you're using a solvent-based adhesive. Let's just take a step back for a second. There's several different types of adhesives. There's CA glue, which is basically cyanoacrylate glue. There's epoxies where you mix two compounds together, and then you've got 5 minutes to apply it to your object and join them together. I generally don't like using 5-minute epoxy for any sort of 3D printed stuff. And there's two reasons for that. One, you're relying on the strength of the glue to hold the two parts together, to join the two parts together. It's not going to melt it like some of the solvents that we're going to talk about in just a second. The other reason is that epoxy tends to add thickness. So I've made props and things before where maybe the tolerances of the model were a little too tight. And you're like, okay, I got all the dry parts, I sanded them, and everything fits in perfect. Okay, great. And then you try to use like epoxy, and you're like, how come it's not fitting anymore? And it's because the viscosity of that glue is so thick, it's actually adding to that thickness, okay? Now you might think that's not a big deal. I'm just joining two parts together. Why is that a big deal? Well, let's say you're building some long prop or some crazy space blaster thing, and it's like something that needs to join multiple pieces together that then needs to fit into something else. You might find that by the time you glue all the pieces together, it's 1/8 of an inch longer on the other end. So again, maybe not a big deal for you, but if it's like a mechanical or functional piece, sometimes that can actually make a big difference. So just be careful of when you use that. I find they work, but I actually don't find them as strong as other types of adhesives. You can also use a solvent-based adhesive, okay? So this is kind of my favorite way of gluing 3D printed parts. I will tend to use CA glue if I need a little bit more work time. Sorry, I'm gonna grab some water. But my preferred method of gluing 3D printed parts together, is solvent-based adhesives. So again, sand your parts first, and there's several different kinds that you can use. I think the branding's changed on these, but these used to be made by a company called Weldon, and now it's like Cygrip, or Cygrip bought Weldon or something. I don't know. In Canada, it's marketed under Cygrip, okay? And a lot of these adhesives are actually made for acrylic and other plastics. But the unique quality that these have is that, in particular, for PLA printed parts, PLA Plus, and ABS, and even PETG, is you can use a solvent-based adhesive on those parts. And what is solvent-based adhesive? Solvent-based means when you apply it, it's actually melting the base material, and it's like you're welding the two pieces together. So you can get, thicker, kind of goopy viscosities. Be careful again with this because it can add thickness to your part, but most of the time I like runny stuff, okay? So this is like Cygrip 3, you can use 16 is like the thicker compound of it. A chemical name is methylene chloride. So kids, we're getting into toxic stuff here, so ask your parents before you go out and buy this stuff. Methylene chloride, I get it from a place that sells fiberglassing and casting materials. And they're all incredibly runny, okay? Like these, sorry, not this. These two. And I've got a couple other sort of cans in the garage, but like they're all solvent-based adhesives. You can also use Plastruct plastic weld, which is a solvent that's made from models, okay? So how I would do that if I was gluing this again is I would actually put these two parts together. I would just use masking tape to kind of hold them in place. And then I would take a paintbrush and I would dip it into the solvent, and I would literally just run a bead along the seam. And what's going to happen is it will melt through just even that little gap that you've crushed together. It'll actually flow into that. And because you sanded it, it actually melts the sanded area better than it would if it wasn't sanded. And it joins fairly quickly. So you can kind of go around and just work it around. And I for something like this, I'll do like the outside and then I'll do the inside. And it's super good. Like you basically like welded your part together. It sets very, very quickly. You pretty much don't have much working time. If you're gluing like little 3D printed like greeblies together, I don't really have an example of something, but like, if I wanted to like glue the ends of these two things together like that or something, a trick that I'll do is I'll actually spread a little puddle on one and then a puddle on the other, and then just slam them together, align them, move them around, slam them together, let it squish out, and you'll notice that the stuff that squishes out is like liquid PLA. It's like totally melted it. So that gives you an indication of how strong this is. And I've done that where I've put pieces like that together, clamped them together, left them for like 5-10 minutes, and you're like smacking them on a counter and they won't come apart, you'll definitely break your print before that weld comes apart. So I really prefer solvent type gluing of 3D printed parts. One other method I'm going to talk about real quick, which I actually used on the Admiral here, is soldering. So, welding seams together. So what you can actually do, I don't have a soldering iron here right now, but like if you joined two parts together, maybe tack them in place first with a little bit of CA glue. If you needed that structural strength, you could actually take a soldering iron or like a wood burning tool or something like that, and you can actually like melt the PLA together. Now the issue I have with that method is you're really only melting the surface of that part. If for some reason you couldn't get to the inside, like on this one I can get to the inside, you're really only welding the outside. So I know there's people that are like, oh, you should always like, solder your parts together. I don't think it works for everything. Sometimes it's about finding the right solution that works for you. For Admiral Akbar's head, I actually 3D printed the whole top half, and I couldn't fit it on the printer, so I had to cut it up into sections. So the head is actually cut up in 6 sections. And when I glued the edges together, I used methylene chloride and the brush, and I solvent welded it inside and out. And then I took a soldering iron and I actually welded the inside and the outside. Now, the problem is that when you do it on the outside, you're going to create this like harsh burn scar, right? It's all melted. But I was going to be bondoing the heck out of this anyways, because there was a lot of print lines and there were some irregularities. There was actually things on the model that weren't correct. Like I wanted to add these wrinkles, so I used like marine putty and sculpted those in afterwards. So I knew that it was going to be covered with material. I wasn't worried about what it looked like, but I wanted that strength. So that's where I was able to use a soldering iron to kind of like weld those parts together. That's, kind of how I sort of glue stuff together. There is one more method I'm going to talk about real quick, which starts to lead into kind of the last bit of the finishing, which is using UV resin. So this is actually the UV resin that you would use in the resin printer. But an interesting trick that you can do to it is when you pour it out, it's, and I'm going to do it, I'm wearing gloves, and I should have a respirator on, okay? But again, do as I say, not as I do. I'm just going to pour a little drop out here. I'll try to tilt the camera a little bit. I'm just going to grab a brush. Give me a sec. It's right over here. All right, so a trick that you can do with UV resin is in its liquid state, it's got the consistency of like something between honey. It's not pancake syrup. No, pancake syrup. It's basically a texture of pancake syrup. So one thing that I started doing a little while ago was using this to smooth prints. And I'll talk about that in just a sec. But one other thing that you can do, or I've heard of some other people doing, is using that as an adhesive. So spreading the resin on your two parts, like for example, if it was this, I was gluing the parts together, and then use a UV flashlight, right? So you can use a UV flashlight there, or I have a UV lamp for curing, and then you would use that, and then that would cure the resin. Now, that works, but it basically works in the same way as this. It's no stronger. So again, it's relying on the structure of that adhesive to hold those parts together. It's not melting it together. So in my opinion, it's going to be a weaker bond. But again, if it's something that you want to try out, by all means, give that a try. It could work for you. I do want to talk about resin smoothing. So we talked about how to traditionally smooth your prints is like sanding. Oh, sorry, we sanded our parts, but we didn't finish them. So let's pretend you went all the way to 400 grit and now you want to finish your part. So filler primer is kind of the most traditional thing. So why is filler primer different than regular primer? So filler primer has more like a body material in it. And actually, if you think about glazing putty and Bondo, one of the core ingredients is talc, which is baby powder, something that we're going to be using here in just a sec. And you'll find that when you use filler primer, you spray it on, and then I'll sand it again with like a 400 grit. It basically fills any fine scratches, and you'll get a really, really smooth coat with filler primer. So I'll usually do like 2 medium coats of filler primer over an object, and then it's enough. Again, people are sanding to like 600 and stuff. You don't really need to if you use a good filler primer. Now the best filler primer to get would be like a 2K filler primer, which is like an automotive process. So with 2K, you're actually mixing 2 chemicals together. It's catalyzed, and then you put it into a spray gun, and then you spray your object. Now the problem with that, it builds very thick. It sands really nicely because it's really chalky, but now you have to have all that equipment to go with it. So now you need a spray gun, you probably want a spray booth, you definitely need a respirator, and then it's like you got to clean that gun within half an hour or something, because the lifespan of that 2K is not very long. So that provides the best build and the best sandability, but you need all that other stuff to go with it. Most people, if you're living in an apartment or something, you're not going to have access to all that equipment. You don't have a compressor or a spray gun or a spray booth, but you can get a respirator and you can get a rattle can, right? So that's kind of why filler primer became super popular. The brands that I stick with the most, I really like Duplicolor filler primer. And in Canada, we have this 1K, it's by Dominion Sure Seal. It's a 1K high build filler primer, and it's for auto body work. And it's sort of like, this is like a step below 2K, but it feels thicker than this one. I really like this stuff. You can get it from Lordco and Napa auto parts suppliers. You can sometimes get it from Canadian Tire in Canada, but and again, there might be an equivalent in the States. I don't know what other brands are in the States that might have this, but this is like the ultimate, and it lays down super smooth. So I've used this on lots of different builds. So yeah, those are the most traditional methods. So I would normally 2 coats of filler primer. I won't necessarily sand with like 600, but I might take like a green Scotch-Brite pad and smooth out the filler primer, because filler primer leaves like a bit of a texture. It's sort of like a chalkboard kind of texture. So if you're going after some super glossy smooth finish, you probably want to smooth that out. So I'll just like Scotch-Brite pad it, and then you paint your part. I still stick with Duplicolor and Montana for top coat spray paints if you're using rattle can stuff. So like all my Mandalorian armor was all like Montana paints, and Montanas are kind of funny. It's almost like it started as a graffiti paint, and now it's kind of like an artist craft maker paint. It sprays out at a very low velocity. It's very low pressure, but it has a lot of fill and a lot of pigment in it, and it's something that you might need to get used to in terms of like how it comes out. I know some people have had problems with the nozzles on Montana, and they go for the finer ones. I can't remember what color it is. But Montana is a really good brand. Duplicolor is a really good brand. In a pinch, Krylon, if you can even find it or get it. Rust-Oleum is banned in my shop. You never see it in Rust-Oleum. You'll see leftover cans of Rust-Oleum. The reason why I don't use Rust-Oleum is in certain environments, Rust-Oleum can take forever to cure or dry. And even if I've had Rust-Oleum, a painted thing where I let it sit a week and then I try to top coat it with another Rust-Oleum, like, mask off an area and paint a different color, and it starts rippling whatever's underneath. So it's just like, it's ruined way too many projects. And like, who has like a week or 10 days to wait for something to cure? It doesn't make sense to me. Like, spend $2 more and get Duplicolor or Montana and just like solve all your problems. So in terms of like, finishing and painting base colors, that's kind of the process I use. I will talk about resin coating now. So the interesting thing, I'd always heard about this, but then I'd never seen anybody do it. And so if you go on my YouTube channel, like and subscribe, I did a couple of tutorials on how to smooth prints using filler primer. Using resin, UV resin. And I haven't really seen any other videos showing how it's done. And I want to see how it's done. So basically, it's really simple. You sand your part. Basically, you're trying to take down all the high spots that are already on there. You take a paintbrush and your UV resin, and this is regular UV resin. I'm not using water-based or anything. and you basically brush it on there as smooth as you possibly can, okay? Now, the trick here is if you lay it on too thick, oh sorry, let me back up. We'll talk about other kinds of smoothing, okay? So you've heard of products like XTC3D, which is a smooth-on product. You mix two things together. I've tried it tons of times. I can't get it to cure in my environment. I don't like it. You can also use fiberglass resin. So same thing, you mix two parts together, it comes out a liquid like this. It eventually cures, maybe, and it tends to smell really bad. And then after it cures, you can sand it. This UV resin, I've tried both of those. I don't like them. I'd rather, it's that whole like, if I can spend $2 more and save myself a ton of time and get a better result, why not do that? This process uses very little resin. I did, what did I do? Was it a Mando helmet or something? I did something like armor related. I think it was a Mando helmet. And like, I maybe used like a tablespoon and a half tops of resin, like UV resin, not very much at all. And it just worked super well. But what you do is you brush it on, okay? And can you see that there? And then you take your UV light and now you're curing the resin. So this is pretty much the same way that the resin printer there all works, right? And I'm just using this little flashlight right now because I don't want to unplug my big lamp over there, but of course you can't do this outside because the sun or daylight would cure the resin before you even got it down. But now you have a cured layer that's like filled a lot of the print lines. Now again, I wouldn't, you can try to do it on a raw printed surface. I tend to sand it just so I know where the deviations are in the surface. But like it's dry. Now it's leaving little fingerprints on there because cured resin always has like a bit of this residue that gets left. So I'm just gonna, give me a sec, I'm gonna get a squirt of alcohol and wipe that off. And then I'll show this to you. Okay, so it's just at 99% alcohol, so I do that. Now, you can put on a couple coats if you want. 2 coats is more than enough. But the benefit of this method is if you're doing like an Ironman, so this, I'm rewinding back 2 or 3 years here. Some people are like an Ironman armor, and it's got like all these panel lines and stuff, all these details all over the face, and they're using epoxy, fiberglass epoxy, XCC3D, and they're putting it on like way too thick. They're not thinking about, they're trying to get rid of the print lines. And then it's like, I can always tell when people have coated their prints because I'm like, well, you filled in all those details. So it's just like when you're spray painting or auto painting, it's better to put on multiple thin coats rather than one thick coat, right? You'll just get a way better result. So again, you saw how much I worked it in terms of like spreading it out, and that's only one coat. So if I just take like this guy again, sorry, I was trying to do it over a wastebasket. Again, don't do as I do as I say. What's that phrase? Don't blow the dust around, right? Again, I built like a little table thing out in the garage where it's like a grill mesh with a shop vac attached to it, so I can sand stuff and all the particles will just go down, like a downdraft kind of thing, right? But like, check that out. Like if I did the filler primer over that right now, you're gonna see lines like, I don't know if you can see them, but there's like a line right there and there. But like this is, I mean, what did I spend on that? That was like 10 seconds of sanding, the first time, and another 10 after. And it's like, look at that. So it's all about picking and choosing the material or approach that best suits your object, right? So I'm trying to think of something like if I was trying to do like if I was making a Groot statue or a Groot, I don't know, costume or something, I wouldn't necessarily use the resin. Now I'm gonna change change my train of thought on that for a second. I wouldn't necessarily use resin for the to coat all the bark, because like it's going to fill in all the detail, and maybe you don't want that, right? Or you're doing some sort of like dinosaur thing, and it's like you print it, it's got all these scale details, and use resin, and now it's going to fill in a bunch of those details. So it's about picking and choosing when is the right time to use that material. I'm going to show you a cool trick, which is super cool. Now it's something that I did with Akbar. Here, I'm going to bring this closer, and I don't know if you can tell on camera, but he's got this great texture on there, okay? Okay, so I really wanted it to look like a crab shell. Oh, here's an arm. There's Akbar's arm. And now this is a latex casting, but the original, I had a 3D model made, and then look at all that cool texture, and then look at that. So it's like there's way rougher texture there, less texture on the top of the hand, and almost no texture on the bottom. Because if it was a real creature, even if you go look at a crab, it's like the outer parts, you know, the top is like more rough than the underside, right? So how did I do that? You don't necessarily sometimes want to have that modeled into the model. Again, if you're doing like a dinosaur velociraptor or something, it's like, it's probably going to have all that kind of texture because of the scales, but if you end up filling it, that's no good, right? So a trick that I came up with, there's two things you can do. Now I don't have the container in here right now, but there's a material called Cabasil, and Cabasil is like it's sort of like, they call it micro balloons, and it's like tiny little. If you imagine like when you wash dishes, like the soap suds, but way smaller in a hard form. But you gotta be super careful, because even if you take a spoon of it, it's just gonna start like floating in the air. Again, kids, super toxic stuff, wear a respirator and goggles and gloves. But what I did was I basically doled out some resin. Let's just say it was like a tablespoon of resin, and then 3/4 of a tablespoon of Cabasil. And again, look up where you can get it. You probably Smooth On sells a version of it. But it basically creates this like lumpy paste, okay? And then what I did was I used a sponge, and I sponged it all over the surface, and then I used my UV light and I cured it, and it was like, bam! Super cool surface. So that's what that is on Akbar. On the hands, I did it on the original print of the hands, and added more Cabasil so that it was kind of more lumpy and rougher on this part, and then less Cabasil on this part. And then I just used regular resin on the palm to make it smooth and slick. And then when the mold was made, it captured all that detail. So now you can like bring texture to your print when you need it, right? Because not everything is like Iron Man super smooth. Sometimes you need a little bit more texture. I'm going to talk about one more smoothing trick, and then I think we are pretty much done. So this is just baby powder, okay? So again, wear a mask and all that, because like, I don't know, like, did your parents put like baby powder on your butt when you were a baby? And I was like, oh, it's super safe. And now they're like, it's not that safe, don't breathe it in, right? So don't breathe this in. Again, kids, respirator, mask, gloves. If you mix, so a common trick that I'll do for crafting is if you, I'll just demonstrate it right now, is if you take CA glue and you put a bead down, sorry, I don't know if you can see that there, okay, there's a bead right there, yep, and you mix baby powder with it, you will get a filler material that dries very hard, but because of the baby powder, it's easy to sand. And you could remember that gap on the C3po arm? I could have used that too, because what's the core ingredient in Bondo and glazing putty? Talc, which is baby powder. So now this would dry somewhat quick. So I mean, you maybe only got like even right there, like you only got like 30 seconds to kind of play with it before it starts to harden. Now, if I had put more CA glue down, I'd have a little bit more working time. And then if I didn't want it to settle, I could use the accelerator and spray it on there and it would harden, and presto, now I got like instant body filler, right? I'm always thinking of keep trying to be aware of ways that I can work faster rather than like, hey, let's put Bondo and let it sit for 15, 20 minutes and all that. But here's the UV resin with talc, right? So same thing, I'm mixing, oh, and the reason this pink thing is just a leftover silicone from mold making. Like, you know, when you make a silicone mold, you mix it in a bucket and then there's always like a little bit at the bottom. I keep those to make these little refillable, like mixing trays. And then because nothing sticks to silicone, once this is cured, you can like crack it off and then use it again. So you don't have to use like pieces of cardboard or paper plates or little containers all the time. Anyways, so I just mixed up, instead of Cabasil, I mixed up baby powder. So now that's another, this could be, if I mixed it up chunky, I could use it to fill gaps like the C3po Arm, or if you're like, oh man, this print just like has gnarly weight, you know, print lines, or maybe I got some ringing on the print. This right here, if you didn't want to like go and spread a bunch of glazing putty, baby powder mixed with the UV resin, and then now you kick it with the UV light. And this is just like, again, like the Resin Printer, it's pretty much how it works, right? So, but what's the advantage of this? The advantage of this is that you can sort of brush it and it's more flowable than the glazing putty. The glazing putty, you have to smear it. So it's kind of like getting different viscosities. Sometimes you want something really thin, like the filler primer. You want to get it all over a surface. Sometimes you need to work it into a corner, maybe the UV resin with baby powder way. Sometimes you spread it with a stick. You know, it could be Bondo, could be glazing putty, could be, you know, if I'm working on something small, I don't want to smell up the house, you know, a little CA glue and baby powder will do it, right? So, like, that's already hard. It's hot too, be careful, because it's an endothermic reaction, right? So, but see, check that out. See, it popped right off, right? And it, you know, once it's fully hard, I can tell the bottom's not quite, but I can snap it, right? So it's crispy, which means it can be sanded. Again, respirator and filtration and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so that gives you kind of multiple options of how to finish your print before you paint it. And there's all different kinds of methods for different objects, and I can't say that there's always just one that's absolutely the best. It's about taking your prop or whatever it is and thinking about which way would be the best, right? So like most of like my Mandalorian armor was like filler primer and glazing putty, right? Akbar was resin and Cabasil and baby powder. You just pick different methods for different things, and oftentimes it's about, the way I look at it is, the better your print is off the printer, the less work it'll be after the fact, right? People always try to make like prints that are like not such a great quality work, and it ends up being way more work. It's just not, in my opinion, it's not really worth it. So, yeah, that's about it. Do we want to do some Q&A first? Sorry it's gone on so long. I went way longer than I said I would. I know it's like 120 minutes now, but do you guys have any questions? I will try to read questions. I'm going to bring this other laptop over just so I have it in front of me. If you have questions, put them in the comments. Just going to refresh this. No questions? Everyone, or else everyone's left. No questions. Oh, you've stuck around for the whole thing. All 18 of you, you guys are awesome. I can make, yes, Walt asks, can I make a list of my favorite glues and paints? Yes, absolutely. I'll make a written list, and hopefully this is all saved. And I'm super paranoid, so I'm going to actually, like, where's my phone? I'm going to take pictures of the comments in case it, I don't know, for some reason this doesn't save or something like that. So let's get to the contest part. Again, thank you so much to my friend Stephen at resinprinters.ca. So if you want to enter the contest to Mars, I'm not going to turn the camera around, comment with the word spotchka in the comments below, and I will capture that, and then I'm going to do a random draw. I'm not prepared right this second to do a live draw, but if we do that, or sorry, I'll do that, and then I'll post the results. Spotchka! I'll post the results on the Panda Props Facebook page and Panda Props costumes on Instagram. And if the comments here will work well too, I'll post them here as well too. So again, if you're in Canada or the United States, Spotchka, make sure you spell it correctly. If you're in Canada or the United States, the printer will be shipped to you free of charge. And if you're international, you'll be contacted. You'll need to pay for shipping, unfortunately. But thanks again to Stephen at resinprinters.ca. Thank you so much, Stephen, for your generosity. And hopefully we'll be able to maybe do this again sometime in the future. We'll see how it goes. But thanks everybody for watching. I still see people commenting. I'm just going to see, I thought I saw a question pop by earlier, but I'm just going to double check. No, they're just jokes about wearing glasses because I'm old. Do you wipe your resin with IPA after curing? I do. So that's a question from Steven. Sorry, I just moved the mouse and I lost it. So yeah, if I do the coating, I do. So I'll either spray it and wipe it, or I'll spray it on a rag or something and wipe it. Yeah, it leaves this residue, and if you try to paint on top, the paint's not going to stick. So you have to clean it off. But even before that, sand it first anyways, right? So let me back up, wait. Coat with the resin, clean it with the alcohol, sand it, then paint it, okay? So you have to do it in that order, otherwise it's not going to stick. Yeah, let me see if there's any more questions. Otherwise, everyone here is awesome. Have you tried using a cabinet scraper? I have actually. It works. So that's a question from Andrew. Basically, if you have a 3D print, and this is like my C3po Arm. I don't know if I really want to, but basically like a cabinet scraper is like a metal scraper that you use for scraping cabinets. And basically you're doing that kind of thing onto it so that you can like shave, kind of like planing a piece of wood, right? To shave it. I've done it. I'm lazy. It's a bunch of effort. Like brushing this stuff on is way easier. I also find with the cabinet scraper is you have to be really careful of the profile of the scraper. So if you had a flat edge, you might end up creating like, not grooves, but flat surfaces, right? And you can get curved cabinet scrapers and stuff like that. But yeah, I did try it a few times. It works. You also do have to be careful because the, if your layers, if you don't have like a ton of layers, you may end up, sorry, I'm super paranoid. I'm gonna like screenshot the heck out of this. If you don't have enough walls, in your 3D print, you just gotta be careful that you don't like scrape into that, right? And I actually did that once where I just got like too aggressive and I got into a corner or a high spot of a corner and I ended up kind of cutting it and oh man, you can see the infill now, so that was no good. Yeah. What type of Bondo do I use? I use like 3M. I use a brand from a local automotive, it's not a local automotive supplier, I'm sorry I don't have it right now. It's something like Featherlight Bondo, and it's like, so there's different grades of actual Bondo, like there's regular Bondo, and then I think there's something called like Featherlight, and it's like it's like the high end, it's like the last bit of bondoing that you do, and it's like a finer grade. That's the only way I can describe it. So it doesn't feel as heavy as regular Bondo, lighter. So sometimes I'll use that. either works. I generally try not to like Bondo too much. This top part of the, I don't know if you see it, this top part of the head is probably one of the few things I've Bondoed a little more than usual. So I don't know if you can make it out, but there's these two kind of lumps on the top of the head, kind of like a butt cleavage there. And that didn't exist on the model. And so I actually just spackled on a bunch of Bondo, so it was about 1/4 of an inch thick. And then I carved that groove, and then I smoothed the sides. So I generally try not to use a ton of Bondo because it adds a lot of weight, right? So that's something you have to be careful with. But yeah, that's about it. Anyways, thank you. Good luck to everybody in the contest. Thank you again to Stephen at resinprinters.ca. I hope this was helpful. I hope just kind of the whole thing kind of alleviated some anxiety. I know some people are like, oh, I got a printer and spin in a box and I'm totally creeped out about doing anything with it. I'm hoping this information just helps get you on your way. And yeah, thanks for joining in. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Happy New Year to everybody. Thanks so much. Bye.